All right, very good. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Carlos Alcaraz. I'm with the JBS Protecting Futures TTA team. Today we're going to be talking about subawardee monitoring and PMT reporting activities. Heather is here joining us as well from the JBS OVC Protecting Futures team, and so she'll be monitoring the chat. As you have questions, please feel free to let me know or let us know. You can raise your hand or just interrupt and chime in. Again, we're trying to keep this casual, and the goal really is to make sure that you've got your questions answered and that we cover all the requirements for PMT as we are in PMT reporting season. Feel free to raise your hand, submit your questions via the chat. If you do have any technical issues, feel free to use that email if you're not able to use the chat. If you can use the chat, go ahead and do that as well, and we can respond there. We will be recording this session, or we are recording this session, and so we'll be sending it out to the entire Protecting Futures subawardee list, and so everyone should have access to it. If after today's session you have questions, we've got an office hour scheduled for tomorrow as well. I believe tomorrow is it 1 o'clock Eastern, Heather? And then again, next week, there's a second office hours where, maybe you start the process of, responding or answering the questions in the PDF and something comes up that you're not sure how to respond to. Feel free to join those sessions, or you can always just contact us at the protectingfutures@jbsinternational.com email and we'll respond.
Yes, both of those are at 1, and the links to those to register, if you haven't already, are in the same email that you used to register for this one.
Excellent. Thank you, Heather. All right. So welcome once again. We're going to start by just sort of reviewing the plan for today. We're going to start with the review of the individual subawardee monitoring meetings. And so those are meetings that will be scheduled here soon. We're going to dive into detail of what that looks and sounds like. Then we're going to spend some time talking about your PMT reporting requirements. So your requirements as subawardees, including the requirements, the deadlines that we have, as well as detailed review of the required question bank. So we've got some slides we're going to go through, but after we're done with the slides, I'm going to go ahead and pull up that fillable PDF that has the PMT reporting questions in it, and we'll go through each of the question banks that you're required to complete. Again, as you have questions, feel free to let us know, and then we'll talk about some of the resources and talk about getting help and answering questions. All right, so let's start with the individual subawardee monitoring meetings. So the purpose of these meetings is really to ensure that projects are maintaining fiscal, contractual, and programmatic controls to support project success. We're going to be reviewing the health of the project, including key progress and compliance indicators. Really, we're looking at the budget. How are things going with the budget and your projections? We'll touch base on the scope of work and key activities that you had planned and how those are rolling out according to your project. And then we'll also talk about data collection and reporting. We're going to be reaching out to each individual team here in the next couple of weeks to schedule those meetings. We anticipate those happening at the end of October or early November, and that they will happen quarterly. And so these will be, again, quarterly touch bases to check in on these different things. They will be different from the standard coaching meetings that we have. We do want those coaching meetings to continue to be focused on program implementation and TA that we can provide. And so we don't want these monitoring activities to interfere with that work. So these will be separate and, again, focus specifically on those elements of the monitoring. So here is a little bit more information. Again, we're going to be meeting with each subawardee individually. When I say we, it'll be me. I'll be meeting with the subawardees that I've been working with, and Eldrina will be meeting with the subawardees she's been working with. And this is really what the agenda looks like. The financial health, we're going to be looking at the alignment of the budget and expense trends. Our team will bring that information to the table. We'll talk about, what expenses have happened so far up to the current or within the quarter. We talk about burn rate. Is that what we anticipate? If we're 25% into your project, or let's say we're 10% into your project, does the expense rate match that? It doesn't have to match it. Again, we know each project is very unique and has different costs that hit at different times. And so again, we'll just talk through it, make sure everything's looking right and like what we'd anticipate. If there are issues or if we do see that it's not aligned, we'll talk about strategies to get those realigned. The operational health, we'll look at the time task plan. And so that will be the time task plan that was submitted with your original application. We'll be looking at some of those key deliverables or key activities that should have happened by certain times. We'll again touch base on how those are going. If they're off schedule, we'll talk about either plans to get them back on track, or we'll talk about just shifting the schedule, right? We do recognize that those time task plans were submitted based on a slightly earlier start date for subawardees, and so we'll be sure to adjust that and account for that as we're having these conversations. For that element, we're going to bring your time task plan to the conversation. We ask that you also bring those too and have a good understanding of where each of those tasks or activities or deliverables stands, and that'll just make sure that we're all on the same page and talking about the same things. PMT reporting, it'll be a good opportunity to touch base on PMT. We'll be able to review the last report together and make sure that everything that's been reported makes sense to us all. Any questions that you have about PMT, they don't have to wait until this point, but it's a good time to sort of just, check in on data collection activities, making sure that you all have the systems in place to collect the required elements, and also offer suggestions if you need some support. The last thing that's part of this agenda item or this meeting agenda is reminders and guidance on frequently accessed DOJ compliance information. And so making sure that you're familiar with the DOJ financial guide and any questions you may have about that. It's a good time for us to just sort of revisit other requirements. For example, as you all submit invoices, you don't necessarily submit all of the backup documentation, but based on the requirements, you are required to hold on to some of those things. And so that's things like timesheets, for example, where we don't ask that you submit those necessarily, but that you continue to maintain records. And so good time to offer those reminders then. These will happen quarterly. There's your answer, Anna. They'll happen quarterly, beginning either end of October or early November. And so they'll pretty much be along the same schedule as PMT reports. So if we do need to schedule things more often, we can definitely do that. Again, if you all would like more frequent touch bases on those things to talk about certain things, you can certainly ask your assigned JBS coach, either me or Aldrina, to have those more often. But any questions about these, any other questions about individual subawardee monitoring meetings? I think I sort of glossed over the suggested subawardee team participants. These are the folks who would represent all of the aspects of our collaboration. And so the project coordinator probably has a great sense of where each of those activities lies that may be on the time task plan. Grants and contracts and finance staff often have a good handle of the finances and where spending is. And so they may bring some of that financial information to this meeting. That's sort of the plan. They're typically, I envision these meetings will be about an hour in length. As we get deeper into the project, they may be quicker if everything is looking healthy. See another question in the chat. So, comment from Anna. Thank you. Yeah, we're hoping that it will be. And again, if things come up before these meetings are scheduled, we're always here to help you. We're here as a resource, so don't hesitate to reach out to us. Don't ever feel like you have to wait for one of these meetings to happen before you ask a question. Relevant resources for these meetings are your subaward agreement. So the agreement has a lot of the information related to requirements, DOJ requirements, the Department of Justice grants financial guide. That's also a great resource, again, to remember what are the allowable costs and expenses and things like that within your project. Again, if you stick to your submitted budget, we've reviewed, your original budgets or the ones that were approved to ensure compliance, broadly. But, these are other great opportunities for you to get some more information or more detailed information. If your grants and contracts folks have questions, these are great places to go to. And Heather has input the links to these resources. Thank you, Heather. And so again, if you all need to take a peek at them, feel free to. All right. So that's subawardee monitoring, again, quarterly. We discussed the meetings. Now we're going to shift gears to PMT reporting. So Real quick, I just wanted to review sort of the overarching purpose of PMT reporting. OVC does use aggregated grantee reported performance data for a few different purposes. The first purpose is reports and publications to educate key stakeholders and the public on the value that these programs bring to the victim services space. And so again, it's really helpful for OVC to be able to say, hey, through this Protecting Futures initiative, we were able to develop this community capacity. These are the types of stakeholders that we have engaged in these projects, and that kind of information, right? And so that's sort of how this information could be used. It's also to respond to inquiries from Congress or other government agencies when they want to know, all right, what are the activities that these grantees or subawardees are engaged in? They've got a standardized data set that can point, that can speak to those activities. So those are sort of the broad purposes of PMT reporting. For that reason, it's important that we make every effort to report accurate data. Let's take a step now into subawardee PMT reporting. And so, the purpose of this is to, again, meet that requirement from OVC and also be able to speak to the activities of our projects, right? And so, JBS has to submit quarterly reports. And within our reports, we've got to include subawardee data, right? And so the way that we do that, we'll go into here in detail. It's a quarterly reporting schedule. And so reports are due in October, in January, again in April, and then in July. So those are the quarterly periods. There's some slight differences between the ones that are submitted in October and April and the ones that are submitted in January and July. And so we're going to talk a little bit about those differences today. First, we're going to start with the October and April reports. So these reports are what we call quantitative data only. Okay, so the fillable PDF, which we're going to go into here in a little bit, has a couple of different sections. One of them is quantitative data, which is really reporting on the activities that you've accomplished in numbers, right? The number of trainings you may have provided, the number of TA activities you may have supported. Again, we're going to get into the details a little bit later. But then there's a separate section where it asks for some narrative responses. Okay, and so for these reports that are due in October and are due in April, right, we'll only do the counts. We're not going to complete the narrative sections. And so that'll become a little bit more clear once I open the PDF itself. You'll report those, you'll use the fillable PDF. So we're going to review that document. It was also sent out as a link. That's the form you're going to complete. You're going to fill in the required responses. You're going to save that fillable PDF, and then you're going to submit it to the Protecting Futures inbox, and you're going to copy your assigned coach, right? Here you see, again, the deadlines that JBS is actually required to report by the 30th of these months. So October 30th, we've got to submit our data. April 30th, we've got to submit our data. But we've had to shift the deadline then for subawardees to a little bit earlier, just to give us time to make sure that we have an opportunity to review your data. If we have any questions, we have a good 20 days there to ask about any modifications we may need or changes that may come up. And so that's why those deadlines are earlier than the standard deadline that we've got to comply with. I do want to note that today is October 12th. And so, we've extended the deadline for this very first subawardee report to, I believe, the 23rd. And so you all will have some more time to complete these reports, to ask questions. Even that deadline of the 23rd, we're happy to be flexible as long as we've got communications and that we're working towards getting those submitted in time for our submission, I think in that last week of October. So again, there's some more flexibility beyond what we've sent out. Just keep in communication with your JBS coach, either me or Aldrina, about support that you may need to complete those things by the end of October, so we can submit it by the 30th. I do see a question in the chat, so let me see. Oh, nope, it's not a question.
In anticipation, if you would like to follow along when we open up the fillable PDF, there's a link to it there.
Beautiful. Thank you, Heather.
Sure.
All right, so those are sort of the broad requirements for these first sets of PMT reports. In terms of the required question banks, so here are the required question banks for you all as subawardees. It'll be question bank 1, training, question bank 2, technical assistance, question bank 4, data gathering, 5, collaborative partnerships, question bank B, which is the partnership shared measures, and question bank C, planning activities, policy, and procedural changes shared measures. So we're going to go through each of these here later on today. So right now, these may not mean much to you. For some of you who do have experience with PMT reporting, they'll be familiar. One of the other sort of interesting things about being a subawardee, and one of the things that we noticed as we started this is, you all are responsible for reporting on the same measures that JBS is. And so there isn't any difference there. And so that's why you're not seeing the victim services question bank 7 in there. Some of you may be familiar with question bank 7 and maybe used to completing that section. That's not required for this report, again, because JBS doesn't provide those direct services. So that's why you're not seeing that section in there. And that's why some of these may seem a little bit different from what you may actually be doing. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that as we get into the actual questionnaire. So for the last thing that you'll see here is that for the reports that are due in October and April, you do not need to complete the narrative semi-annual reporting questions that are on pages 28 and 29. Okay, so those are only for the periods that you'll be reporting in January and July. So again, we're going to revisit those narrative questions. We're going to actually pop open this PDF so you see exactly what I'm talking about, but I did want to mention that here in this slide. So I've been talking about the January and July periods as well. And so this is where we will actually be completing those semi-annual narratives, right? That's what's different about these two sets of reports is the narratives. The deadlines are similar in that they're the 10th of the month on January, the 10th of the month on July. We're going to submit them to the same place, which is to our inbox and copy of a signed page. Again, the key difference is when you all go to a court here in January, you will have to complete those.
Carlos, your audio is breaking up a little bit there. Oh, you're muted now.
I've got a plane that's flying really low.
Okay.
Sorry about that. But I could barely hear myself think. So yes, the key difference between the one that the report you'll submit, for the month of October or during the month of October, and the one that you'll submit next time in January is those semi-annual narrative questions. So we'll talk through those here in a little bit, but just so you know that's why we've sort of split these up between quarterly versions and the semi-annual versions. Any questions about those? We've got some resources here. The Welcome to VOCA Transforming Victim Services Performance Reporting Package, which was also linked in that handout we sent out, is a great place. Again, the fillable PDF form is something else that's been linked. But if you all have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Together and over time, we'll make sure that we've got collecting all the data that we need and that it's accurate. It's not uncommon, and in fact, it's probably more the norm that subawardees have questions about what these different things mean. And so we're going to try to address some of them today. But again, as you begin your reporting and begin documenting activities, or retrospectively looking at what's been accomplished in the first quarter of your project here, don't hesitate to reach out. Really, we're about supporting your understanding the reporting requirements and building that capacity. All right. Okay, so let's take a look at the fillable PDF. Any questions before we jump into the PDF? Stop sharing, and I'm going to share the PDF now. Okay, Heather, can you see that okay?
Yes, I can.
Right, very good. So this is the OVC Transforming Victim Services Performance Measures fillable PDF. All right. You've got some initial instructions here. Again, it speaks to the purpose or the objectives of OVC, talks about the structure of the questionnaire. Really, it does also lay out this quarterly reporting schedule. And so just as a reminder, these deadlines that are listed here are really JBS's deadlines for submitting all of our reports and all of your reports, right? And so again, you all should stick to that 10th of the month deadline, again, excluding the current one, because we know we've got the flexibility here. If you ever need more time, do communicate with us and say, hey, something's going on. As long as we get it by these deadlines, we're typically, we'll be able to provide some support, TA, flexibility, but do communicate with us so we can make sure that we've got our reports in on time to OVC. All right, so let's take a look here. The first question that everyone's going to answer is, was there grant activity during the reporting period? For the majority of you all, it will be yes, you have been operating the project, and so that should be an easy one. If for some reason there hasn't been any program activity, you would mark no, but again, that's a conversation you probably will have had with either me or Aldrina about what the state of the program. So then the first one that we're required to complete is question bank 1, training. Before I talk a little bit about training, I wanted to address that comment that I had made previously about, you all are required to complete the question banks that JBS as the primary grantee is required to report on. Some of your projects have training elements in them, some of them do not, right? And so again, don't feel like you're required to complete this activity if it wasn't part of your original proposal, right? And so we don't want you to shift the activities of your proposal, of your approved proposal or project to align with these measures, right? That's not the intent of them. If you are doing these activities, yes, absolutely, we want you to report on them. But again, I don't want, there were several programs that were funded where training wasn't a key activity, right? And so that's okay. If you end up having 0 for training, that's okay. There's some of these other question banks that also kind of follow that same concept. I think we're going to talk about technical assistance, right? And so again, you may not have technical assistance as part of your activities. And so if there's a 0 there, that's okay, right? We don't want you to shift your resources to align with these measures. We funded those projects because we wanted you all to carry out the projects that you proposed, right? So just make sure that you keep that in mind. If you have 0s for some of these activities, that's okay. So with that, let's dive into training. This asks about trainings that you may have provided. This may be trainings to community stakeholders. It may be trainings to community partners. It may be trainings that you provided for your own staff, right? What this doesn't count as trainings that you attended. Again, this questionnaire is really looking at, okay, what did we fund? What are you doing what have you used these grant funds or these subaward funds to accomplish, right? And so that's something to keep in mind as you answer all of these questions. Did the Protecting Futures project fund this set of training that we delivered? If so, then yes, absolutely count it. So it asks about training activities that occurred during the current reporting period. Again, that would be for the past 3 months. For this first report, you're looking at the July 1 through September 30th period. And so, the baseline question here is about number of hours training delivered in the quarter prior to the grant becoming operational. For many projects, they're not delivering training associated with this initiative until that first day. So this may be a 0. Right? If you were delivering other trainings prior to this initiative around these topics that are a focus, child victims of the addiction crisis, then you may want to count those hours here, right? But for many folks, it may be 0, where there wasn't a lot of training going on around this issue prior to this initiative. That's your baseline question. We then talk about the current quarter and the number of trainings that were scheduled for the reporting period, right? And so maybe you had planned to carry out 3 trainings to community stakeholders about the types of services that are available through this project, or about the unique issues of children who've been impacted by substance use and substance use disorders, right? And so this would be sort of your plan. That's where you document that. The next one is how many were actually conducted, right? So of those that you had planned or scheduled, how many were completed. Then question 4 is about the number of participants that registered for training scheduled. And so how many people did you anticipate at those trainings? And then 5 is how many people actually attended the training. Okay. 5B asks about the types of participants who attended the training. Okay, and so here's information, and again, there's people who fall into multiple categories, right? You can, it says here, you may select more than one type of participant if applicable. If you select other, include the descriptions. But again, these are the folks who attended. Were there law enforcement present? Were victim advocates there, victim service providers, government officials? And so you'll indicate which types of participants were in attendance at those different trainings. Okay. It then asks for the number of hours of training. So, for example, if you held 3 trainings during the period and each one was 2 hours long, then you've got 6 hours of training. And so you'll count the total amount of time that was spent training. And feedback surveys, if you collected feedback surveys, this is where you would document that. If you didn't, you'd skip to questions 8, or excuse me, you'd skip questions 8 through 11. But here you'll be able to say, yes, I did. No, I didn't administer feedback surveys. Again, just reporting on what's been done. If you did administer feedback surveys, we've got the number of participants who completed the feedback survey, how many were satisfied with the training based on the feedback survey, increases in knowledge, we have a reported increases in knowledge, and then we've also got, let's see, question 11 is the number of participants who completed the post-training feedback survey report planning to implement training knowledge and objectives. So again, these are folks who, again, after training, report that they do plan to implement what was covered. So, I'll sort of revisit something that I mentioned before, where if these aren't part of your standard training activities, it's post-training feedbacks, that's okay, right? You just mark no. We're not asking you to recommit resources to complete these activities if they weren't part of your standard project. If they are part of what you propose, then yep, we'd like to see what that's looking like and how training is impacting, your trainees. Right. Questions about the training question bank. Seeing none, we'll go on to technical assistance. So question bank 2 is technical assistance. Again, this asks about technical assistance that you may have provided during the current reporting period. Something that is often helpful is differentiating between training and TA. And so I'll offer an example. Many of your programs may be training key stakeholders, maybe referral partners on the types of services that are available through your projects. And so that would be considered a training where maybe you've got 5 or 6 different organizations that you're talking to about the types of services. But let's say one of these organizations is really interested and they say, gosh, we'd really like to be able to better identify clients that meet your definitions for eligibility, and to maybe identify some neat ways to refer them that are maybe warm handoffs, right? Where we can call you right when we identify them and set up an appointment with them. Can we do that? And so that would be more of an example of a technical assistance episode, right? Where we're working with one organization, we're talking specifically about how they might be able to better identify the population of young people that we're serving and families that we're serving, and we're going to figure out the specific referral pathways for them, the workflows associated with making those to ensure seamless connection, right? And so that would be more of an example of a technical assistance, right? We're getting into the weeds of things. We're helping figure out workflows. We're changing the way that we operate, right, to meet a specific issue for a specific organization. So that's an example of technical assistance that many of you all may provide, right? So just keep that example in mind. And if you're not sure, feel free to reach out to us and we're happy to provide some determining how to handle that. So similar to training, we've got the number of TA requests that you've received. And so again, maybe it was one organization that wanted that additional information. Maybe there's one organization of 10 different requests for support. This is where you'll count the number of TA requests that you received. Number two is about how many were completed, right? And so, how many did we actually close the loop on and provide that support and assistance? Number three is the number of recipients. And so that may be how many people participated in that TA activity. Maybe it's one organization, they submitted one TA request, but we had 4 people there at that session because we needed to talk to someone who was in charge of records maintenance, someone who would be the clinician or a clinical manager who was making referrals or supporting referrals, and then someone on our end who's receiving those referrals, right? So then we'd have 3 recipients. So again, you'll total those out for the entire quarter, okay? And that's where you'd count the number of recipients. Similar to training, we've got those feedback surveys. If you do administer feedback surveys, you'll answer these questions about how many of them completed a survey, how many reported satisfaction, and how many who've completed report plans to implement the changes or implement changes to policy or programs based on the TA, and then how many who completed it did implement those changes, right? And so again, those are, if you do collect those surveys. If not, you'll hit no and you'll skip those questions. Just like I said before, the expectation isn't to reallocate resources to complete these activities. If you don't, you can go ahead and hit no, and that's okay. Any questions about the technical assistance question bank before we move on? I think I'm seeing any, so we're going to skip question bank 3. So technology developments is not a required one, so we're skipping that one. Keep scrolling till I get to the next one. All right, question bank 4, data gathering. That is one of the required question banks for you all. And so this asks about data gathering and research activities that occurred during the reporting period that were funded as part of the grant. Again, we're going to talk a little bit about what qualifies as data gathering initiatives. The goal is to produce and disseminate information resources, including literature searches, needs assessments, gap analyses, and reports that support improvements in delivery of services to crime victims. Okay, so that's sort of the definition. There is if you go to that welcome package that we've linked you to, there's another user guide that does sort of speak in more detail about each of these data banks or question banks. And helps provide some other helpful information about definitions and so on. But again, feel free to reach out to us if you're ever confused about what these things mean. I'm going to provide a couple of examples today to sort of help as I think they relate to some of your programs. All right, so the baseline question here, again, baseline questions ask about activities prior to this project being operational. In this case, they're asking about the number of data gathering initiatives planned for the project period. And so this is where you'll say, well, how many of these data gathering initiatives, either literature searches, literature reviews, gap analyses, maybe policy reviews, how many of those things did we plan as part of our project? And so, for example, we've got some projects that may be doing literature reviews to inform the development or adaptation of assessment tools. And so that would be an example of a data gathering initiative where, yep, we're looking at the research, we're looking at, best practice guides, we're looking at, what's been going on in the field to inform this tool that will impact practice, right? And so again, that's an example. There are many others, right? If you all are looking at literature, looking at gap analyses, may be collecting data from multiple stakeholders, right? About, what are and when I say data, I also mean things like qualitative data. Maybe we're having interviews with key stakeholders to assess what they know about services that may be available or gaps in services that may be available for children and families impacted by substance use. So if we're collecting that data for this purpose, that's another example of the types of data gathering initiatives that you all may be doing. And so again, review your proposals. Is there something that sounds like a data gathering initiative in there? And if so, this is where you're going to want to count it, right? How many of these did we plan for the whole project? Okay. You'll put that number in here as your baseline, and then we get into current quarter reporting. And so question number 2 is about the current quarter. How many of those initiatives were completed during the current reporting period? Again, how many of those are done, right? And so if, let's say, you did those stakeholder interviews and you talked to, all of the folks that you had planned to, you've collected that data, and we've produced a report or some sort of output, then we would consider it complete. If it hasn't been completed yet, let's say you're in the middle of it still, you're still waiting to interview a few people, or you've interviewed everyone, but we haven't completed that report, then we wouldn't consider it complete. Okay, that's for the current period. Number 3 is about the number of information resources disseminated as a result of the data gathering activity. So again, going back to that example of interviewing key stakeholders and identifying gaps, this would be the report, right? And so let's say we did produce a report, we identified sort of the key themes and identified what are those gaps in services. That report itself, that one output, would be an example of something that you would put here. So that would count as 1, count the number. Sometimes there's confusion around, well, it was one report, but I gave it to 30 people. Is that 30? No, it's still just one report. Maybe it's one tool or one guidance document that you completed as a result of those literature searches or literature reviews. So, it would be, 1. Things that may happen, though, things that happen often in our work. For example, if we did complete that report that spoke about the gaps and services for children, for child and families who are impacted by substance or substance use disorders, and then we converted that report into a presentation for stakeholders or a data visualization handout, right? Those are all their own unique tools. So now we're talking about 2 or 3 different resources, right? And so really thinking about this question 3 being about, the number of outputs associated with or unique tools associated with that data gathering initiative. So if we created a report and we also did a presentation and we also did, a 1-page handout, right? Now we're talking about 3 resources that were developed. Okay, so that would change this number from 1 to 3. Any questions about these first few questions for data gathering initiatives? Seeing none, we're going to keep going. And if something comes up later, feel free to let us know. All right, question bank 5. So that was it for data gathering initiatives. Question bank 5 is collaborative partnerships. And so this asks about your activities establishing or maintaining partnerships during the reporting period that are funded by this project, right? And so again, that's the other thing. I'll continue to come back to that. Many of your organizations have multiple initiatives, multiple projects. And so again, we're not talking about the whole organization. We're really talking about this project. It may be that this project does leverage several of those other activities or groups or partnerships, and that's okay. We just want to make sure that it has to relate to this specific initiative. So the baseline question here, question number 1, it asks about the number of groups, organizations, or agencies participating in the initiative prior to grant funding. For many of you, this will be 0 because, again, the funding does sort of speak to a specific set of activities that you have started as a result. For some of you, it is continuing some work. And so in that case, there may be other organizations that were involved prior to this specific project. But again, keep in mind that we're talking about Protecting Futures, the project that it's supporting. And so it may be that this is a 0. Then we shift to question 2, which is about current quarter, and it asks about the number of groups, organizations, and agencies participating in the initiative as a result of grant funding. Okay, and so this is something that confuses folks. Really what they're asking is about subcontracts or subawards that you all may have. There are a few of you who do have subawards, and so you would count any organization that you are funding through the Protecting Futures initiative in number 2, right? If they're partners that you have an MOU with but really don't fund, right, then you wouldn't count them here in number 2. We'll count those here later on. But again, number 2 is specific to organizations or partnerships that you are funding through the Protecting Futures funds. Okay, there are some of you who do have that, so I just wanted to point that out. Question number 3 is, again, the broader version. So this isn't dependent on funding. These are those organizations that you may collaborate with, right? These may be your referral sources, right? People who send folks to you to provide services. So this would include all of those people. We would still include the number of folks who you do fund as part of a subset of number 3. But again, number 3 is that broader group, right? So any questions on those questions 1 through 3 of the collaborative partnerships question bank? Yeah, I'm going to keep going. All right, so question 4 is asking about the number of those partners who utilize an evidence-based program or practice. Okay, and so here is of the total partners that you've described up above in question 3, you're going to indicate the number of those who use an evidence-based program or practice. And again, when we're talking about evidence-based program or practice, you can see, things like OJP's guide for best practices or evidence-based practices. OJJDP has a model programs guide. And so again, these are things that have been shown through the literature and through evidence to be effective. Common examples are things like trauma-focused CBT and those types of therapeutic interventions, right? And so those are the things we're talking about here. In addition to the number of partners who use those, question 4B asks about what evidence-based programs or practices those are. And so you'll list those here. All right, continuing on. Question bank 6, strategic planning is not a required question bank, so we're going to skip question bank 6 altogether. Question bank 7, victim services, as I mentioned before, is also not a required question bank, so we're going to skip question bank 7. Question bank 7 is long, so it'll take me a while to skip through. Then we're going to get to the shared measures is where we're going next. Question bank A is not required, so we're going to skip that one as well. And so here's the next one that is required. Question bank B, partnerships, shared measures, right? And so here are the questions here. For the past quarter, again, for this first report, you'll be talking about the July through September period. It asks for the number of new formalized collaboration agreements that were developed. This may be things like MOUs that were developed, and again, specific to this initiative, specific to your Protecting Futures work, right? And so that's what we want to know a count of. Again, there isn't a requirement that you have these here. This may be 0. You may not have any new MOUs or formalized collaboration agreements in this period, and that's okay. But if you do, that we want to count those. Question 2 here is the number of new letters of support that were secured. So not quite MOUs, but maybe support letters from folks who want to support your project, but without a specific indication of resources that are going to be shared or developed. Question 3, rate the following group partners based on the statement, this partner is actively involved in the program. It's a Likert scale, and it lists a variety of different partner types and sectors. In terms of determining whether they are at a 1 or a 5 or anywhere in between, really that's up to you all to set that definition. What does it mean to be really actively involved? Are they attending key meetings? Are they referring a lot of people to services? Are they part of planning meetings that you're having or creating documents or guidelines that you all have proposed? And so really that's up for you all to create that definition. And then you'll go through each of these different types of partners, and you'll select either strongly agree, disagree, neither, agree, or strongly agree for each of these different ones. You've got the NA option if they aren't part of your group. And so you'll select that for each of these different partner types. Okay. Any questions about that section before I move on?
It's okay to unmute. I think we actually do have a question. Yeah. So the collaborative partnerships and then the partnerships, those are two different sections. How we formally did this in the past are folks that we captured in the collaborative partnership section. Also, we would reflect in the partnerships section
Correct.
as well. Okay.
Yep, that's right, Anna. That's right. Yep. All right. Any other questions? Okay, moving on to question bank C, planning activities, policy and procedural changes, shared measures. Again, asking about the current reporting period. Question 1 is number of planning activities undertaken during the reporting period. And here the instructions are important. So here it talks about counting the number of planning activities that can include the creation of task forces or interagency committees or advisory groups, meetings that were held for planning. And so, for many of you, this first quarter may have had several of these because, again, all the planning that goes in with implementing a new initiative or a new project. This may be meetings you had with your core team about initiating certain activities. This may be meetings that you had with partners about, first steps towards updating referral processes or policies, procedures. Again, there's a variety of different things, but again, if you're planning things related to this initiative, right, you want to count those here. So that's question 1. Question 2 is the number of agency policies or procedures created, amended, or rescinded during the reporting period. And so again, examples of these are, many people will adapt their intake policies to or procedures to include new screening tools to assess eligibility. Other examples are, collaborating with, maybe it's amending the needs assessment process for young people or families coming in to identify more holistic needs for referring to new partners. Those are examples of policies or procedures that may have been impacted. What we find is that organizations typically do a lot more of this than they may think. And so definitely as you're thinking about this, think about, gosh, what have we changed as an organization, as a service provider, as a planning entity to account for either new services that we're implementing, new partners that we're engaging, or new deliverables that we want to achieve, right? And so definitely take a second and third look at your activities and see, did any of those result in policy or procedure changes? Okay, so that's sort of the end of what we call the quantitative portions of PMT reporting. Those are all the required quantitative question banks. You will report those, your responses to those at every report. We're going to shift now into the semi-annual pieces, which are the more narrative and qualitative reports. And so these are the semi-annual reporting questions that you'll only report for or include in your reports for the January report and July report, right? So these narratives aren't required every time. So let's take a quick look at them. Important that you can only use up to 5,000 characters for each response. And so it's a pretty good amount of space. Having done these for 5 or 6 years, you can get a pretty good narrative, but just recognize that you may not be able to fit everything that you've done in these narratives. And so you may have to sort of pick and choose some of the highlights of your project. And this is a really great opportunity to give context to those numbers above. And also for many of you to speak to some of those direct services and victim services, because question bank 7 is not required for us. This is a good place to start plugging in some of those numbers of the number of individuals served, children and families served, to give us, again, a really good look at what does this look like in terms of those direct services. Other highlights, you all have some really great and cool deliverables that you're going to produce through this project. And so this is really a great place to showcase those and really let those shine. So I'll just start with that, but let's go into each of those questions. The first one is describing the status of each goal and objective from your award. And so again, one of the things that I've always done is I've taken a look back at what we proposed, what are the key objectives that we said we'd accomplish, and then provide an update on where those stand currently. Again, this is based on 6-month periods. And so your first one of these will be due in January. And so you look at the July through December period to answer these. You know, it's a good time to talk about progress that you've made towards achieving each goal and objective. You know, successes that you've had, goals or objectives that have been completed, deliverables that have resulted from your work. And so again, that's sort of what the focus of that first question is. Question 2 is any problems, delays, or adverse conditions that you encountered, if any, that affected your ability to reach your goals or objectives. We know that that speed bumps and hiccups and implementation happen. And so this is a good time to talk about those things. For me and Aldrina, as we review these things, you know, we obviously want to make sure that we've had a chance to talk with you all about these problems and delays. And again, they're as partners and collaborators in implementation, you know, our role is to support you all through those things. And so as we read through these, it's important that, or I guess we'll just be considering it. Hopefully it's things that we've talked about. If there are things that we haven't talked about, that's okay too, right? But again, something that we may revisit and say, all right, let's figure this out. How do we support you all in moving forward? But that's what you'll include here. We know that problems and delays happen. And so again, it's just part of implementation. You know, feel free to put those in here. Question 3 is about TA that either JBS or OVC can provide. And so, you know, related to what you've identified in question 2. And so again, if you have TA ideas, feel free to put those in. If not, that's okay too. Question 4 is about being on track fiscally and programmatically to complete your program in the time within the budget specified and in your grant application. So again, each of you all have a specific period of performance. And so this really aligns with that. Do you feel you're on track financially and programmatically to complete on time? Question 5 is about significant developments. And so really, I like to use question 5 as things that may not fit neatly into question 1 and that specific objective review. This is a great place to showcase, you know, some of the other progress that you've made, things that are going on maybe in the program's operational environment that impact you, whether there are things that are create potential for enhancements or enhanced impact, or things that may be risks in terms of achieving the outcome that you wanted. But again, really a good place to showcase things that you just feel really good about your project or are concerned about that you haven't been able to speak to in questions 1 through 4. Question 6 is about the next 6 months. You know, what's coming up? What do you plan to achieve in the next 6 months? What are going to be high priorities for you here moving forward? Question 7 is about sustainability. And so you'll respond to you'll select which of these best applies and then provide a little bit of narrative to support your answer. Question 8 is about sharing your award with other entities. And so again, some of you do have other sub-awards or subcontracts. And so you'll ask them to provide, you'll mention information here. And so that's sort of what question 8 is, you know, talking about those folks and information that they may be providing to you all. Let's see,
Carlos,
can we? Question.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, I see a question in the chat.
Where to provide the narrative responses.
Yep, so this is fillable, so you should be able to provide it right in here, Anna.
Okay, up to whatever the word.
5,000 characters. What I'd recommend folks do is, you know, create them in a Word document, and hopefully you should be able to copy and paste them right into here.
Okay, it'll fill in there. Okay.
Yeah, I think so. I've never tried it, so that may be something that we check out.
Carlos, what happens if you go past those 2 lines? Does it extend?
I believe so, but let's see. Whoa. Oops, I hit a button I shouldn't have. Yep.
Cool. Sounds good. Cool. Thank you.
Yep. All right. So those are all the narrative questions. I'm going to stop sharing real quick to see if there's any other questions here. Yeah, so those are all the requirements. What questions, thoughts do you all have right now, if any?
I just had a quick question. Will we always skip the sections for each quarter? I mean, well, those are just always skipped.
Which ones?
Just
Ashley?
the ones that you just
the ones that I skipped today. Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
And so how many question banks is it that are required?
One, two,
it's the training, the technical assistance, data gathering, collaborative partnerships. Then there's the shared measures, and C, shared measures. So there's 6 required question banks. The others you will always skip.
It's 3, 6, and 7 that will be skipped each time, correct?
That sounds right. Let me see. Yep, 3, 6, and 7. Yep. What else? Other questions?
I think my only other question is question 8. So if we do have I'm using the wrong word, but subawardees or subgrantees, we give them this exact same thing and we say, hey, fill out these specific sections. Because I think where our challenge is, typically most of our partners actually like implement our work. So like it might feel a little bit redundant if what we put in ours and what they write there, it might be the same data.
Yeah, I would recommend, and I'm going to get clarity on that one, because usually, or I suspect, and that there's sort of an end to, it almost feels like how far down does this trickle, right? And so I feel like if you plan to include the activities that you do with your partners as a sub-awardee, then we should be covered, and you shouldn't have to report it twice or have them report the same stuff you're reporting. So Anna, that's what I'll say right now. I'm going to get clarity from our friends at PMT just to make sure that that's accurate. But as of right now, I would expect just one of those PDFs coming from each of these sub-awardees.
Okay, that makes sense, right? Because when we initially entered it into the PMT, we'd have our sub-awardees fill out these, but it would be like you from us and then us from ours. So that would be a little bit confusing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if they have any, then they'd have to submit.
Right.
So we've got like
Okay, sounds good.
Other questions, other thoughts? All right. Yeah. So thank you all. And again, as you have questions, as you start doing it, for this first period, you're going to sort of look retroactively at many of these things, right? And look at your program records. When did we have trained? What did we train our staff in? Or when did we train other people? And so that's what the plan will be. If you run into any issues doing that, definitely let us know, reach out. We're here to support. We can help answer questions. And if you're not sure how to categorize something, let us know. Again, we've set that October 23rd deadline for these. If you need a little more time, do just reach out to us, reach out to me, reach out to Aldrina, and we can talk about when we can stretch that to, and that also just helps us plan for receiving them and as we need to submit them. So communication is key. Just keep us in the loop and we'll get it all figured out. Heather, anything else that I'm missing?
I don't believe so. I don't have anything else.
All right. Well, it was good to see you all. And I hope you have a great rest of the Thursday, and we'll talk again soon.